So this is the penultimate session today, and this is a slightly different format. Hope it works. Should do. This will be so it's a panel discussion. We are addressing the theme of how do we build extended longevity into our visions of the future. And the way this is going to work is we will have three very short, pretty shortish presentations, five or so, 5, 6, 7 minutes, and then afterwards, hopefully we can have a kind of discussion from the floor, questions between each other, between ourselves and between the panel. So I'm very. Because the presentations are very short, what I'll do is introduce everybody now, if that's, is to introduce everybody now, so I don't have to do this whole, this rigmarole in between. So anyway, I'm really pleased to introduce Adrian Gallop, who will be the first speaker. And Adrian is at the Government Actuaries Department. It'll be followed by Julie Mills, who is from the Office for National Statistics, not of National Statistics, I get into trouble, the Office for National Statistics, and then finally Jane Falkingham from the University of Southampton Centre for Population Change. So without further ado, Adrian, thanks very much.
Okay, first of all, Stuart, thank you very much for the invitation to talk to today at the seminar. And Stuart asked me to talk a bit about what actuaries do with mortality and longevity. This is a bit of possibly a sidetrack from what the things we've been hearing earlier on. Given that these exhibits here are actually in Staple Inn, in the home of the actuarial profession in the UK, I guess we can also consider John Graunt as one of the founders of actuarial science as well as demography. I must say I didn't know we had these books, so it's been very interesting to see them today, even though I've been an actuary for 30 years or so. So this is just going to be a very brief discussion about how actuaries use mortality rates in their kind of everyday work. I mean, most of you probably know that the main areas of work for actuaries are in pensions, particularly defined benefit pension schemes, defined contribution pension schemes, in life assurance, which is again where the life tables were first used, I think in about 1700s. Possibly long-term care insurance, and something which is a bit slightly more modern thing, which is a secondary market in longevity risk. If you kind of run an occupational pension scheme, you don't want to have the risk of people living too long in the scheme, you can now pay other people to take that risk off you. So for all of these things, actuaries need to measure and project what they think the future mortality rates are going to be. And the way actuaries usually approach this is a two-stage process. It's first of all to produce a table of mortality base rates. These base rates are meant to reflect the experience of the group of people that you're interested in. So if you've got an occupational pension scheme, you will look at the mortality experience of the people in that pension scheme over the last 3 or 4 years. And then having got a table of base rates, you then apply future rates of mortality improvement to those base rates, so age-specific mortality improvement. So you need to make some assumptions of what these improvements would be. So in order to kind of get a set of base mortality rates, as I said, you might look at the data that you've got yourself, so it may say pension scheme data or data from the people who buy insurance annuities from you if you're an insurance company or life insurance policies. You might use standard tables produced by a body called the Continuous Mortality Investigation. We have a member of that investigation here in the audience today. They collect data from insurance companies and from occupational pension schemes, and they produce, then they graduate the mortality data from that experience and produce standard tables. So if you've only got a small scheme or a small group of people who are not statistically significant enough to actually use their own experience, you might compare that mortality data with one of the standard tables produced by the CMI. And possibly make some adjustment to that and take that as your base mortality rate. You might want to use population data or other publicly available data, or you might get data from reinsurers if you're insuring your business, or from other pension consultants. Again, in most areas, actuaries will be looking at mortality rates for a subgroup of the population, so they could be very different from the aggregate mortality rates of the population as a whole. In general, people in a pension scheme are in work, and they generally tend to have lower mortality rates than the population as a whole. So again, you may look at subgroups, or you may, in looking at the subgroups, you may look at the data of that group altogether as a whole group, or you may look at the individual characteristics of people in that group, or you might use a proxy, for instance, the full postcode, and there's quite a big business now of people analysing mortality experience of pension schemes by looking at where people actually live, because that tells you quite a lot about their lifestyle, how wealthy they are, and so on. So having chosen your set of base rates, you then need to choose a set of improvement rates to apply to those base rates. And again, there are various ways that actuaries do this. There are lots of models that actuaries use, which analyse past trends in mortality and then project those forward. So they're kind of extrapolatory models. The CMI also has its own model, which many actuaries use, and that one you can input various parameters such as long-term rates of improvement and so on. And I think, going back to what Mike was saying, quite a lot of actuaries are now using something for long-term rate of improvement around 1.5 to 2% in that model. The CMI also produced a library of lots of projected improvement rates using other models that the CMI have produced in the past. You might decide to use ONS population projection rates. That's something that we do in our mortality bases at the Government Actuaries Department for valuing public sector pension schemes. You might want to use models which are based on scenario-driven, so you might want to analyse various risk factors and then project those into the future, then how you think that will affect mortality rates improvement in the future. So again, it's going back to something that Mike said earlier, you might want to build a model that's looking at smoking incidents. And also actuaries, there are differences between whether using a best estimate or prudent rates, both of the base rates of mortality and the rates of improvement you're going to use. For certain areas of work, you use best estimate ones, and for other ones, you build in a margin of prudence. You then also have to think about whether mortality improvement rates might vary by subgroup, and this is a much more difficult problem, and there's very little data on there about how mortality rates vary by subgroups of the population. So another kind of important thing, which is not just for actuaries, but possibly in terms of informing policies in general, is to produce a measure of uncertainty. I mean, you have a model and it will produce a set of projected mortality rates, but one thing we will know more or less for certain is that they won't be correct. And you want to produce a measure of kind of how mortality rates might go. In terms of the population projections, which Julie's going to talk about in a minute, we do deterministic projections. We have a central projection rate, and then we have two variants where we have a high life expectancy and a low life expectancy variant rate. And then we expect the users to choose the projections, the set of the variant projections which would suit their purposes. You can also produce stochastic or probabilistic projections, which then give you a kind of confidence intervals into a range of mortality projections going into the future. There are some issues, again, into policy as to how you communicate the results from these, particularly stochastic and probabilistic projections to policymakers, because they tend to like to have a fixed, one answer, not a range of answers. Or how would they interpret it if you say, well, life expectancy is going to range in 10 years between 80 and 90 years? What do they do? How do they actually take that into their policy-making decisions? So finally, just as this was talking about policy issues, just to mention again something which has been mentioned earlier, is the state pension age. This is one area where the government has issued various consultation papers on this one, and they may be moving towards a position where we look at pension ages which are linked to changes in life expectancy. So that was just a very quick look through the actuarial perspective on this one, so I'll hand over to Julie now.
So I don't talk. Okay, so when we talk about how do we build extended longevity into our visions of the future, in my case, that's how I look at our projections. And I'm giving just a brief overview of how we do the projections and some of the results. Okay, so basically our methodology is we estimate the current rates of mortality improvement by age and gender, and we do this on a smooth surface, and we it's from about last 50 years, and then we estimate the mortality rates for the base year of the projections because we don't have the deaths and population in time to set the base year. And then we set the target rates of mortality improvement sometime in the future, which, as Mike's already said, is about 1.2 for most ages. 1.2% improvement. And then we make more assumptions on the method and speed of convergence from the current improvement rates to the target rates, and then what happens after that 25-year point in time. And then we apply these successively to assumed base mortality rates. I'd like to say that we do also look at long-term trends in improvement rates, and we also consult with an expert group on whether they think our improvement rates are sensible, and we also consult with all of the UK constituent countries. Right, so some more heat charts, and this shows from 61, 62 improvement rates up to 2010, which is the base year, and then we can see the first 25 years up to the target rate and how we've set that. And the orange and brown areas are high rates of improvement, and the blue areas are where there's little or no improvement, or negative improvements. But as you can see, this is the 1930 cohort going through here, which is Mike pointed out earlier, and this is how we've taken them forward. So as you can see, when I said we do 1.2% target rate for most ages, we do that along here so that these rates of improvement go along in a period, like year on year. But for this group of people here, we do it on a cohort basis so that they have higher improvement rate, and it goes with them through their life. And one of the issues we're having is that these people are going to be aged 105 in 25 years' time. So we're wondering, how long do we have to sustain this for? And the next one is females. And as you can see, less brown areas, but still in the orange. So we're still seeing the improvements for the same cohort. So also, which is quite interesting, is we've got this going on here, and we're wondering what's happening, if we should keep an eye on this age group here. So, coming through, we'll see, we'll have to watch them in the future. Right, so this is the results of the projections on life expectancy, and I've put here for the variance as well. So this is life expectancy at birth in the UK, and this is in 2010, the period rate life expectancy is 82.4 for women and 78.5 for men. And as you can see, we've taken that forward into the future, and the main projection, well, actually these lines have come out the same for some reason. They should be slightly different. But anyway, this is the main projection for females. So that takes them through to 90 by 2060, and 86.8 for males. And that varies between 92 and 81 for men. So that's just to show you that we do produce these variants, and it could be anywhere between these in 50 years' time. And we look again at age 65, we can see that what's happening at age 65, I think they're slightly less increase, but still we're getting quite significant increases in life expectancy still with our 1.2 target improvement rate. Then, just to show you what happens to our projections of centenarians based on the projections that we have, and as you can see, with our high life expectancy variant, that could take us to 1 million centenarians in 2060, which is huge. But as you can see, we've had huge growth in the number of estimated centenarians between 1981 and 2010. So it's grown by nearly 6 times. So that's huge. We've had a huge, which you can't really see when you put this in. So it's just to show you the range that the free variants give you in the number of centenaries it results in. So finally, we've just had the census results out for England and Wales, and we know that the rolled forward estimates have overestimated the old population. There are 3.2% fewer people aged 85 and over in the 2011 midget estimate compared to the 2000 2010-based principal projection for 2011. So there are less centenarians in 2011 census day than there were in our 2010 future estimate. So we know that the mortality rates at the oldest ages are going to be higher, and we need to think about what the impact that's going to have on life expectancy and of the rates of mortality improvement for the next set projections. Okay, I think that's me. Yep.
Thank you. I'm going to be a little bit controversial. The title of my post at the University of Southampton is actually Professor of Demography and International Social Policy. So I thought we'd probably had quite a lot of demography today. I thought I might just inject a bit of social policy into the panel discussion. And I think we were asked to talk about what does the increase in life expectancy mean for us in our visions of the future. So this is a graph stolen unashamedly from Jim, from a presentation that he gave at Population Europe, which shows the increase in life expectancy for the highest achieving countries in the world across the last 160 years. But basically what it shows is that life expectancy over the last century rose by about 30 years in 100 years. So really unprecedented, and thinking about what's going to happen into the future. Again, this is taken from Jim, and I'm assured he wasn't going to use it himself in his talk, so I'm not stealing his thunder. But this shows you the age at which at least 50% of a birth cohort would expect to be alive for various different countries. So if we look at the UK, if anybody's got any children or grandchildren born in 2007, 50% of that cohort, according to the research that Jim's been doing, will survive to their 103rd birthday. So I think in the light of these improvements in mortality, it really means that we have to start thinking about what does the life course mean, and what does the life course mean for us, and how would we arrange our life courses. If we knew when we were setting out on life that we had a 50% chance of making it to our 103rd birthday, would we choose to arrange our life in the way that we have done up to date? This is actually taken from the ONS projections that we've just had presented to us. Julie presented the period projections. These are actually the cohort projections from the same set of ONS population projections using the principal high and low projections. But if we take the high projections, which is the very optimistic scenario about the improvements in mortality into the future, you can see that for the cohort born in 2012, so that's the people born today, their average life expectancy, and again, John's reminded us that this isn't actually a real average, is 105. So we are starting to move into a realm where it may be possible that life expectancy is going to be very extended. So what does this mean for the life course? This is a picture of the life course taken from a book by Tony Warnes, which I use in my teaching, which shows us the life course in the 1930s, where we started life and we had a period in education, then a period of time in work and raising our families. Then average life expectancy was actually before the age of retirement. And if we think about Lloyd George introducing the pensions in 1908, quite simple for him to do that because average life expectancy was 50. You didn't get the pension until 70, so it was a pretty good policy innovation, really. And of course, today, we've seen a restructuring of the life course with an extension of the period of time we're in education. At the same time, we've seen a gradual decline in the effective age of retirement. And so, in fact, most people retire even before the statutory retirement age, and yet life expectancy is now up into the 70s, 80s, and as we've seen, may even go into the hundreds. So what should that think about us thinking about the structure of the life course? And this is really what I want to just challenge us to think about. The life course is already changing quite dramatically. The age at which we undertake different demographic events. We're talking about mortality today, but actually John Graunt also had reflections on fertility, and we saw that in the births data that he was presenting. And you can see here the average age at which women in the UK by birth cohort have undertaken, it's the proportion of women who've experienced various life events by age 25. And you can see the decline in the proportion who have married, and in particular the decline in the proportions who had a birth in their early 20s. I think at the same time we've also seen a quite dramatic change in our working lives. This is using data from some work that my colleagues Paul Johnson and Asghar Zaidi did in a project that I directed at the London School of Economics on simulating social policy in an ageing society. And they used data from the census over a 150-year period to look at labour force participation. Number of things to take away from this graph. One is that actually retirement is a 20th century phenomenon. If you look at the older cohorts, they were working well into their late 60s, early 70s and weren't retiring. You can see successive cohorts are actually cupped inside of each other. And what you see is successive generations of men are both entering the labour market later in their life course and leaving earlier. And I'm looking forward to the census data that's released in the next 2 weeks, because then I can add another point on these lines. That's men. Women have been doing something quite different in terms of their working lives. And you can see actually successive generations of women have been either returning to the labour market or indeed not leaving from the labour market. Now, several of the presenters have mentioned the word pensions, and when we're thinking about increasing life expectancy and the periods of time we spend in work and out of work, we do need to think about pensions and retirement ages. And in particular, there's a big emphasis at the moment on extending working life. But actually, we've seen from the data that, particularly for men, we've seen a contraction of working life in exactly the same time period as we've seen an extension in lifespan. And this comes from a special Eurobarometer survey which was conducted because this year is the year of active ageing of the European Commission, and this was data to inform that. It asks, thinking about what job you have currently, until what age do you think you'll be capable of doing the work you are doing today? And I think it's very interesting that if you look at the younger cohorts of Europeans, those aged 15 to 24, they think they'll only be capable of doing that job until they're 56.7. But actually, they're the generation that are going to live until they're 90 or even 100. Whereas when we get up into those who are 55 and over, they think they can do the work that they're doing now until they're 66. This graph just shows some of the issues around extending working life and why people are stopping working. And I think it just points to some of the policy solutions we're going to have to start thinking about, and in particular starting to remove some of the obstacles to working later in terms of age discrimination in the workplace. So just want to leave you with a couple of comments really when thinking about reforming social policy in our vision of the future in a world where we're all going to live longer. The first thing I want to say is that policy should be gender sensitive, and men and women have very different working and family lives and consequently have very different outcomes. And we've already seen the differences in the aggregate patterns of men's and women's working. This is just taken from some work that I did with colleagues Tom Sefton and Maria Vandrew, where we took data from the British Household Panel Study and we looked back over the life courses of older people today. And then we typologized the working lives of people, of men and women aged over 65 today in the UK. And for men, you can see they're quite boring, really. Men have quite similar lives. So the dominant group is either people who've worked full-time all their working lives, or who've had short interruptions, or have retired early. There's quite a large group there. That's the but they're predominantly blue working lives. Whereas for women, you can see actually it's quite difficult to typologize women's working lives, because you've got people who've done a whole range of different things where they've been combining work with family life, periods in, periods out, periods of temporary work, periods of part-time work. And this is today's older people. If we think about people who are in working age now, I think it will probably be even more complicated. And this relates, if we then take those different work histories and we look at the proportion who are in receipt of a private pension, the pink ones are the predominantly female work histories and the blue ones are the predominantly male work histories. You can see that there are real gender differences. Yeah, working life translates into pensions. The second point I just want to make is to make the link really with between work and fertility. And this is something that Jim first started talking about a couple of years ago, and has really had great resonance with me, is thinking about if we're moving into this period where we can actually expect to live 100 years, then perhaps we should start to think about how we rearrange life to make it more compatible with childbearing. And about 30% of European men and women aged 40 or other report that they stop having children before reaching the desired family size. And this is just to give you a little picture of the 10 countries in the world with the lowest fertility rates. And I think this is really, will take some of you by surprise as to how low total fertility rates have fallen in some parts of the world. Obviously we have China at the top, but then we actually have Bosnia, Herzegovina, we have other countries in Eastern Europe. We heard from John about the mortality crisis. Well, there's also in these countries a fertility crisis as well, which may relate to some of the very same things. And this comes from work by Francisco Bellari, who's recently been appointed to a chair in demography at Oxford, and it's great to have more demographers working in academia in the UK. And basically he's arguing here actually, in order for fertility to rise, maybe we need to actually have a greater move towards gender equality. And it's in those countries which have actually the very highest levels of human development, which are the countries of Scandinavia, where we start to see the fertility rate kicking up. That's in the red line in 2005. And my final thing I want us to bear in mind is that, of course, it's not just childbearing that we have to juggle when we think about juggling work and family life. It's also informal caring. And as we move into a world where people are living longer, then there are also issues around care. And I just want to say recognising and rewarding informal caring and volunteering, which will support intergenerational exchange and solidarity. And 2 in 5 carers of frail older people are currently working. And it's just important to bear in mind care flows up and down the generations. So those are some of my thoughts. I'll just leave you with my concluding comments. When we're thinking about social policy in an ageing society, I think we've just got to start moving away from thinking about age and to have a much more nuanced definition about capabilities. We need to support policies that extend working lives. We need to promote lifelong learning and training and facilitate work-life balance and promote systems of social protection that recognise both paid and unpaid work. And I think now is the time for us to start a debate about a new social policy that recognises the new life course that is going to be ahead of all of us. Thank you.
So thank you very much to Jane and Julia and Adrian, and we've got about 10 minutes for questions. I don't know if there's anybody still downstairs watching this remotely. Hello, pop up or send me a text. Yeah, do I have any questions? So, yeah.
Paul Hudson, thank you very much to the 3 speakers. My main question is directed to Professor Falkland. And particularly, your chair has the title in its social policy. Have you actually fed any of this information to Ian Duncan Smith? He seems very keen, in fact, on getting mothers back into work completely regardless of the fact it's very difficult to find childminders. I mean, I can look after my granddaughter because by luck I happen to be living only 200 yards from where my daughter lives.
I'll rush out and arrange a seminar soon. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, but no, more seriously, I mean, yes, obviously we have fed this sort of information back to government. I think there is a real tension between getting people engaged in the labour market and getting people engaged in caring work. And it's this tension between paid and unpaid roles that I think is something that society is going to have a more open discussion about.
Thank you. One of the distinguishing features of recent debate and events in relation to pensions and pensions crises has been actuarial conservatism and pessimism about future trends in the death rate and the consequent effects upon the level of pensions contributions which have been thought to be appropriate. I note that over quite a long period of time, this pessimism has been eroding a bit and becoming a bit more optimistic. Initially, a number of projections assumed that the linear upward trend in expectation of life would be, as it were, bent flat quite soon. More recent projections have seen that the angle gradually increasing as pessimism declines. I wonder if anyone's actually done a projection of the future development of actuarial pessimism such that it might actually reach zero and that an actually accurate projection might be obtained in due course, which wouldn't damage pension systems.
Well, I guess being an actuary, I have to defend actuaries a bit towards this, but well, part of the problem is kind of looking at the past data is that in more recent years, a lot of these improvements have been coming at older ages, whereas when you were looking at projections that were done 10 or 20 years ago, there was very little mortality improvement at older ages. It was all at the younger ages. And possibly had actuaries then been saying, well, we're going to project these very high rates of improvement at older ages when we haven't seen them in the past. People would have been saying, oh no, you're going to make us pay too much into our pension schemes. People are not going to live that long. So I mean, there is a question of, this is kind of a hindsight kind of thing. And the other thing I would point out is that, we're now trying to, well, I think since the 1980s, we've been doing projections that had variance with them. So people who were using, say, the population projections for mortality improvements, where the risk was on the upside, could have looked at what the effect would have been had we had a higher rate of improvement than the central projection. But you need to look at the kind of the variability. And this is very uncertain, and who knows what's going to happen 5-10 years in the future. Our current rates of improvement may well be too high. Who knows?
I feel this is a bit unfair. I also feel, as I think we all do, slightly invested in the answer to this question, which is, I suppose, the key problem with increasing longevity is obviously the proportion of that extra old age that is in relatively good health. So can you remind me or tell me, is there any sign that the proportionate good health in very old age is likely to increase? Or are we heading towards a future where we live a lot longer but have a larger proportion of our lives in ill health?
Well, no, I think I'm going to save the thunder for Jim, because I think Jim's going to actually be looking at healthy life expectancy in his talk in 15 minutes' time.
Yeah, I'll touch briefly on your question.
Thank you very much. I mean, there was discussion about obviously restructuring the life course and needs to extend working lives, which of course has happened in quite a lot of places, particularly the US. But I wondered if we needed to link that in some ways, move away from these age definitions to years of contribution definitions, because in this country, the contribution element has actually been reduced, I think, from 40 to 30 years, which seemed to me crazy. And it seems extremely unfair that the age groups who enter the labour market, typically at the youngest ages, on an age-based thing, then have a same age of eligibility for state pension age, when, of course, their further life expectancy is much shorter. So I recognise that there are problems in this, but presumably when actuaries do these calculations for private pensions, they could also somehow feed these into calculations of years of work entitlement for perhaps people of different educational levels.
Yes, I mean, there are two issues. First of all, is kind of, if you're doing for a pension scheme, then you're just looking at a subgroup of the population who will be in work and so on. So they've got the question of the differential mortality rates for your base rates, and then the question of how they're going to improve it in the future. So I'm not quite sure you were wanting to go back to a system where you had a length of time, or so I wasn't quite sure.
I mean, it used to be that.
So it's going.
You would get a full state pension after 40 years of contributions.
Yeah.
And this isn't too bad for women because you get home responsibility and care allowance too. But now they've reduced it to 30, but at the same time increased the age. As a matter of fact, I got a letter last week telling me my state pension age is now 66, and about 4 years ago it was 60, which is actually quite a big change.
I doubt it shows that fast.
Never reached it.
Change the half year per year.
My query is that it seems to be extremely unfair that in our current cohorts we've still got a lot of people who actually started paid work at 14, and they are not eligible for state pension age until the same age as people who've had gap years, universities, frittered their time doing PhDs or whatever. Even though the former group, of course, have much lower life expectancy and old age than the latter.
Thank you, Emily. I don't really want to get too technical about this, but I think that the recent pension reforms have slightly confused the purposes for which we have pensions. So there is the extent to which you want to redistribute between people and we redistribute within people's own lifetimes. And the basic state pension is now becoming a residualised safety net in some ways. So I think reducing it to age 30 was to bring into eligibility those women who were outside of eligibility. And although there was home responsibility protection and carers credits, there's still a significant proportion of women who wouldn't have who still wouldn't have made it to the old thresholds. But I think what the reforms then did was rebalance between the basic state pension and second tier pensions, which are much more strongly linked to contributions and working lives. But I think you're right, it was a slightly crazy thing to do, and I think it was also that they've got their goals of the different instruments a bit confused. But anyway, that's a longer conversation. Pardon?
That's why you should call it pension reform, pension change for the worse.
Thanks. Ian Potts, ex-trustee, ex-accountant, ex-statistician. The reason why I say all that is because I support the idea of giving ranges of data, but one of the problems is financial. When you're a pension trustee, the tendency is to go for the easier option for funding. So giving a range doesn't actually always help.
Shall I go ahead?
Yeah.
We've got legislation now for I'm talking about the insurance industry now, unisex rates for annuities, no gender discrimination in any insurance area. We've also got convergence in state pension ages as well, as Emily was mentioning. I suppose I'm really looking for advice because there's a lot of talk now about removing age discrimination now. And the question is, which I'm seeking advice, and I have a genuine issue here because I've been asked to give a talk on it at some point, which is there a future for the insurance industry if you remove age discrimination? This is for Jane.
I'll give it to Adrian. Well, I think...
Yes, that's a bit tricky one for me because I don't actually work in insurance, so I can't give too much of an answer to that one. But it depends on although these things are kind of disappearing, that you are sometimes allowed to use them for for the purpose of setting prices, so although your annuity rates now, well, from the 21st of December, I think have to be on a unisex basis, in order to derive those, you can kind of take assumptions for male, assumptions for female, and then how many males and females you think you're going to sell to do that. So although you're selling on a unisex basis, you kind of weight a male and female, so you can still use male and female data to get to that. So the question, if age discrimination is banned, whether you do something similar or not, I don't know, but it's very difficult to sell annuity. I mean, I don't know what age you would decide on to do that, but not being an insurance actuary, I can't give any kind of a definitive answer to that, I'm afraid.
I think it's very difficult to think of a world in which you could actually have products if you couldn't discriminate on the premiums according to age. Well, no, but when you're converting them, because obviously if you convert your product into an annuity at a particular age, then you get a different rate.
Our national insurance system is on the basis of what you earn or not age you are, and that's supposed to fund your state pension and so forth, and that has a strong redistributive element to it.
I'm afraid we're out of time. I'm so sorry. But if you can hold the questions for the tincture later, that would be great. Thank you so much to the panel, and